In 1996, two young boys fishing in an Ohio lake found what looked like a human skull. All of its teeth were missing, and markings on the skull told a tale of unspeakable violence. Police had no idea who this person was or how long the skull had been in the water. Hamilton, Ohio is an industrial city of about 62,000 people in the southwestern part of the state. It's an area blessed with natural beauty. Residents enjoy the many rivers, streams, and lakes that dot the landscape. On August 7, 1996, 12-year-old Tim Lyons and his friend T.J. Dijon headed to Linden Lake for an afternoon of fishing. But instead of a bluegill or catfish, the boys reeled in what looked like a skull.
It's hard to believe that you find somebody's head down there, that you're just fishing, mind your own business, and you reel in somebody's head. It's just unbelievable.
The boys left the skull on the bank, uncertain of what to do.
I know my mom and dad, they didn't believe me. They thought I was just goofing off.
Like a whole day passed before we went back down there and it was still there.
This time, the boys contacted the police.
First cop down there was pretty much a prick. He came down there and we were showing him and everything. He threw a rock at it and said, yeah, it's real. Now you guys have opened up a big investigation and just kept going on and on, like we did something wrong.
20 minutes later, the whole police force was down there, and they had boats and everything, people scuba diving down there searching for other clues, and it was crazy. Went nuts from there.
The police scuba divers could not find any other body parts in the lake, and a search of the immediate area was also fruitless. The local coroner examined the skull and determined that the individual hadn't been in the lake long, perhaps only a few weeks, because there was still some soft tissue clinging to it. But investigators were faced with a mystery.
You know, when we have a skull turn up, what does that tell you? It doesn't really tell you a whole lot. It could be that somebody robbed a grave out in the country and then got rid of parts of the body. It could be a homeless person who passed away and part of the remains got dragged, an animal, a varmint dragged part of the remains someplace. So it doesn't really tell you that there's a homicide or foul play.
Who was this person? How did he or she die? And where was the rest of the body? To assist in the identification, the coroner sent the skull to the College of Mount St. Joseph outside Cincinnati to Dr. Beth Murray, one of only 63 board-certified forensic anthropologists in the United States.
This case was one of the most challenging, fascinating, personally rewarding, but also at the same time personally terrifying cases that I think I've worked.
Dr. Murray noticed a deep indentation on the top of the skull, which suggested the killer used a machete or a cleaver on the top of the victim's head. And Dr. Murray found other cuts and scratches all over the skull.
And they were signs of trying to get the flesh off of the skull. And it gave me chills to realize that someone had sat with this skull in their hands and defleshed it.
This skull had a nose cavity indicative of a Caucasian. A battery of nearly 24 measurements fed into a computer program confirmed this was the skull of a woman. Dr. Murray estimated that the victim was under 35 years of age. It would be the most difficult murder investigation local officials had ever encountered. Although investigators knew the skull found in Linden Lake was that of a Caucasian woman under the age of 35, they knew nothing else. Marks found on the skull indicated that the flesh had been removed, as had her teeth, in an attempt to hide the woman's identity.
I've seen a lot of criminals try to hide their crime and conceal their activity. It's almost expected, but I've never seen anybody go.
Hamilton police discovered that only 4 individuals had recently been reported missing. One was 21-year-old Tina Mott, reported missing just 2 months before the skull was found in the lake. Tina Mott was the single mother of an 18-month-old son, Johnny. She had been living here on a quiet residential street in an upstairs apartment with her 24-year-old boyfriend, Tim Bradford. Tina Mott was originally from New York. She met her boyfriend, Tim, while she was selling magazines door to door. They settled in Tim's hometown of Hamilton, where Tina worked as a clerk at a local store. Tim was a framer at this art shop.
He was in his mid-20s, so he pretty much enjoyed doing the things that people in their mid-20s like to do. Go out, hang out with friends, go to concerts, things like that.
When questioned by police, Tim said that Tina had gone back to New York to visit her family and left the baby behind. Police soon discovered that Tina Mott never reached New York. Tina was reported missing, not by her family, but by Tim's mother, Elizabeth Bradford.
So at first she didn't really think anything about it, but then when she started calling New York to see if she was up there, and she wasn't, she knew she wasn't away on her own will because she knew she wouldn't leave the baby alone.
Elizabeth Bradford also told police she was afraid of her son and his temper. Armed with a warrant, police searched the storage locker Bradford rented shortly after Tina disappeared. Inside, they found this set of 19 kitchen knives with small, medium, and large serrated blades. Police also found a book on how to kill with your bare hands, and a notebook on satanic rituals. Tim Bradford's mother told police her son practiced devil worship. Also suspicious was Tim Bradford's behavior during Tina's disappearance. An ATM security camera captured pictures showing Tim Bradford withdrawing money from Tina Mott's bank account after she disappeared. Investigators also learned that Tim Bradford occasionally used drugs.
We know from some statements that Tina supposedly had told people she worked with that she was afraid of Tim because of his drug usage. Now, I'm speculating here, but I think what that means is that when he's using drugs, his violent temper, and maybe that's why she's afraid of him.
Next, police searched the couple's apartment. Inside, they conducted a luminol test. A chemical is sprayed on a surface. It can reveal blood that has been cleaned up with water and detergents. On the living room carpet, investigators found an area believed to be human blood. They also found blood on the bathroom floor, in the crevice between the floor and the tub, and also near the toilet. Police suspected the Linden Lake skull was that of Tina Mott, but they needed scientific proof to be certain. When a human skull was recovered from Linden Lake in Ohio, investigators needed to find some forensic technique to make a conclusive identification. The most effective means of identification is by analyzing the teeth of the victim and comparing those to known dental X-rays, since no 2 sets of teeth are exactly alike. But in this case, the lower jaw of the skull was missing, and the upper teeth had all been pulled. Another method of identification is called skull photograph superimposition. An anthropologist takes a photograph of the skull, then superimposes it over a photograph of the missing person in hopes of matching the facial characteristics. Other techniques attempt to put a face on the skull by using facial reconstruction and forensic sculpture. Forensic anthropologist have had only a 70% success rate with these techniques because features like the eyelids, the mouth, lips, and ears are not necessarily indicated by the shape of the skull. It's a technique usually used when all other means of identification have failed. But in the case of the Linden Lake skull, scientists got a genetic break. They discovered that the killer removed all but 2 of the wisdom teeth, which had been embedded in the gun, which the killer may not have seen.
When the perpetrator pulled the teeth, he didn't realize that those molars were up underneath the gum line. So those were protected and preserved.
Dr. Murray extracted tooth pulp from the wisdom teeth and sent it for DNA testing, along with a blood sample from Tina's 18-month-old son. But scientists could not obtain a usable DNA profile from the tooth pulp.
It's possible that the reason is that the teeth were still unformed. And when teeth are still forming, their roots are open cavities.
It was also possible that tiny single-cell microorganisms in the lake called diatoms damaged or altered the cells in the tooth pulp. As a last resort, Dr. Murray tried to extract DNA from the skull itself with a surgical drill. She carefully removed 6 bone samples from the thickest part of the skull.
With sterile techniques, the middle section of that core that I took out had never touched anything but that sterile drill.
The skull bone fragments were sent for mitochondrial DNA testing, which is used in cases where the biological sample is either degraded or small in quantity.
And the mitochondrial DNA is unique because it is passed through the maternal bloodline. You receive it only from your mother. So any maternal relative you have can be tested against the sample.
Mitochondria are found in the cell's cytoplasm outside the nucleus. Scientists have isolated 2 regions of the mitochondrial DNA where differences within the human population appear.
And they will look for exact matches between the mitochondrial DNA in the sample they have and the maternal blood relative that they have.
The mitochondrial DNA from the skull was the same as the mitochondrial DNA from 18-month-old Johnny Mott, which meant the skull was that of his mother, Tina. And one of the long knives found in the storage shed rented by Tina's live-in boyfriend tested positive for human protein. With this news, police brought Tim Bradford in for questioning once more.
I asked him if he knew how to hunt. Yes. Did you know how to dissect an animal and skin it, prepare it for food? Yes. How to dispose of the internals of an animal? Yes. He learned that all through his childhood and upbringing.
Finally, Tim Bradford told police a story of almost unspeakable violence and horror. It was the story of Tina Mott's last moments alive. Every bone found had been cut, either by a hacksaw or a knife. Tim said that on the night of the murder, he and Tina were playing a game of Monopoly. Bradford admitted using drugs that night. At some point, the couple got into an argument. Tempers flared, and Tim admitted hitting Tina, bloodying her nose. Tina went to the bathroom to clean up, and Bradford said he started to put away the fishing gear he had used earlier in the day. Bradford said Tina came running out of the bathroom to continue the argument. Bradford said he had a fish fillet knife in his hand, and in the ensuing scuffle, Tim admitted that he slit Tina's throat. Bradford said he left the apartment, and when he returned, Tina's lifeless body was in the bathtub. How she got there was a mystery to him. Bradford said he worked through the night to dismember the body. He flushed her internal organs down the toilet.
It's unbelievable that a human can do this to another human that he loved and fathered a child with. I cannot grasp that.
Bradford admitted using each of the 19 kitchen knives in the process. And Bradford confirmed using needle-nose pliers to remove the teeth in an effort to prevent a dental identification of the remains.
Cut into the flesh to begin with is hard enough. Then to cut the head off and hold it in my arms or my hands and pull the teeth out, it's unbelievable.
Bradford carried the bones from the apartment in his backpack and in a trash bag to a deserted field where he dumped them. Later, he said, he went to Linden Lake and threw the skull into the water.
If that skull never appeared, this case would have never been solved. It would have never proceeded as a homicide. It had just gone down as a missing person and been a missing person forever.
Townspeople were stunned by the news. Bradford's former boss couldn't believe she had worked side by side with a cold-blooded killer.
He did want out of that relationship with Tina. And unfortunately, he picked a very permanent way out of that relationship. And he's also out of his son's life as well, which is a real shame.
Tim Bradford had no explanation for why he killed Tina, other than to say he loved her and was sorry. Tim Bradford was convicted of voluntary manslaughter and of abuse of a corpse. He was sentenced to 12 to 25 years in prison. Tim Bradford acknowledged his guilt in this exclusive letter he wrote to the producers of this program. Committed an atrocity in the eyes of God and of man, and for that I accept full responsibility. My actions belie my true feelings for Tina. I truly loved her with every fiber of my being. End quote. Bradford claims the pain of his own actions go well beyond those imposed by his prison sentence. Quote,
Doesn't even know or doesn't care about.
I just hope that through law enforcement officers and young detectives maybe seeing this case be aired, that they realize, don't give up. You know, when you get these little clues and when you have gut instincts telling you something's not right, keep on pushing the envelope a little bit. Keep on going after the evidence, because that's what happened in this case. And it resulted in us walking through a field, and maybe we got our shoes all muddy and got a little dirtied and everything, but we found the last of her remains and were able to put a final conclusion to this case. And I'm very proud to be a part of that, quite frankly.
no one was joking in Spokane, Washington on April Fool's Day, 1996. First, a bomb went off outside the office of a local newspaper. Then, another inside a bank. 2 armed men entered and robbed the bank of $50,000. It was apparently the work of well-trained criminals. But one of the bombers made a crucial mistake. A simple pair of jeans he was wearing that day would later reveal his identity. Nestled at the falls of the Spokane River, the city of Spokane, Washington, is the cultural and economic center of an area known as the Inland Northwest, which includes parts of Washington, Idaho, Montana, and Oregon. The region is known for its beautiful countryside and for being home to many right-wing groups openly hostile to the government of the United States. At 2:36 on the afternoon of April 1st, 1996, one of these groups made its presence known in Spokane. An employee at a branch office of the local newspaper, the Spokesman Review, noticed a bomb with a lighted fuse just outside the building's rear door. As he ran inside to call police, the bomb exploded, shredding doors, shattering windows, and filling the building with smoke. As employees fled the building, police rushed to the scene. They found extensive damage, but no one was injured. At 2:47, just 11 minutes after the Spokesman Review bombing, police got another call. There had been another explosion, this time inside a U.S. bank branch only 30 blocks away. Bank surveillance cameras showed two men entering the bank. Witnesses said a third man waited outside in a getaway van. The men inside the bank wore parkas and ski masks to hide their identities. They were heavily armed. At gunpoint, they ordered tellers to put money in bags.
After that occurred, and they got apparently the money that they believed was available, one of the robbers left a pipe bomb on the counter of the bank and lit it, and then told everybody to evacuate the bank. I think the comment was made by one of the witnesses that they said, "Get out, it's going to blow," or something similar to that.
The bomb, seen in this surveillance shot, exploded. It tore through the building, shattering windows, counters, and doors. Again, amazingly, no one was hurt.
If the teller had been standing there, she could have been killed or severely injured. And people inside the bank could have been severely injured from the shrapnel as it flew.
Investigators were now connecting the two bombings. Since the blasts came so close together, police were convinced the first bomb was a diversion designed to draw attention away from the bank robbery. It was clearly a well-planned and well-executed crime.
These people really knew what they were doing. And also, there was no question when they went inside that bank, these were not amateurs. They had planned this.
Letters left behind at both bombings left no doubt that they were related. The letters, which promised more violence, had a symbol at the bottom, a combination of the letter P and a cross. It was the symbol of the Phineas priesthood, a highly armed, extremely violent right-wing terrorist group that had declared a holy war against the United States government. Two bombings on the same day in Spokane, Washington, left massive damage and a community. As bomb experts dug through the rubble, they found letters the bombers had purposely left behind. To experts on domestic terrorism, the letters spoke volumes. They contained symbols that identified the bombers as members of the Phineas priesthood. The priesthood's creed is an unusual combination of biblical prophecy and violence, a radical right-wing view of America combined with a strictly conservative interpretation of Scripture. The result? A fanatical hatred of government and a rationale for violence.
They want to destroy America to save it. They don't believe in reforming America. They believe that the whole system is rotten and needs to be basically torn down so that we can start over again.
David Nywert studied the Phineas priesthood for his book, In God's Country. He says the group takes its name from an Old Testament story about a man named Phineas, who kills an interracial couple.
The essence of the Phineas priesthood is that people who violate God's laws deserve to be killed.
News that the priesthood had targeted Spokane terrified the city and had everyone, including law enforcement, preparing for the worst.
This was the most serious crime probably that's ever happened in Spokane, from a danger to the entire community. Obviously, you have serial murders and a lot of murder cases and so on, but this case had, people in fear. They were terrorized.
Police now knew the name of the group, but not the names of the bombers. FBI analysts went over images from the bank surveillance cameras. The images were shot once every second, making for a disconnected sequence. But when frozen and enlarged, the individual images were extraordinarily clear.
These pictures were some of the best that I've ever seen in the laboratory because they were high quality 35mm black and white photographs. And the individual in question was standing so close to the camera that
that the FBI analysts told them to be on the lookout for. An unusual piece of evidence, a deeply worn pair of blue jeans. After the arrest of 3 men in the Spokane bombings and robberies, investigators looked for conclusive evidence to tie them to the crimes. The buckshot found in Robert Berry's truck repair business was subjected to the same analysis as buckshot attached to the bomb that destroyed Spokane's Planned Parenthood clinic.
Chemically, I couldn't tell the buckshot recovered from the bombing apart from the buckshot recovered from the business. They were chemically the same.
But prosecutors wanted something even more conclusive. Was there a way to use the bank surveillance images to clearly identify at least one of the robbers? Was it possible that these 2 images, which were particularly clear, were the suspect Charles Barbie? The robber was covered head to toe, but his blue jeans were clearly identifiable. Almost all blue jeans are made of white cotton that is then dyed blue. How that blue dye wears off, particularly on the seams, can be distinctive. A sort of hill and valley effect is created. High parts of the seam turn white, while the lower parts retain their color. The fit of the jeans and the posture of the person wearing them can create unique patterns, almost like a barcode that appears along these seams. FBI photograph analyst Richard Vorderbrugge had an agent of Barbie's height wear the jeans taken from Charles Barbie's home. This man was photographed from the same distance and in the same position as the bank surveillance photo of the man thought to be Charles Barbie.
it enables me to get them positioned in a way that most closely approximates what the bank robber's posture was. It also enables me to try and replicate the draping of the clothing as closely as possible.
In a process called point-by-point analysis, the photos are broken down into sections, and each section is analyzed for distinctive features. Then, the two sets of photos, those showing the jeans worn by the bank robber and those taken from the suspect's home, are compared. The analysis showed more than 30 areas where the jeans were identical. Near the number 5, it is clear the actual seam of the jeans breaks and is folded over. This is clear in both sets of photos. At number 7, ridges can be seen extending above the hemline. But at the point where the seam meets the hemline, the jeans lose all their color and go completely white. This is also consistent in both photos. Finally, at the number 2, you can see wear lines shooting off to the left above the hemline. And at the hem, a sort of H pattern is created. It's an H with a broad right side and a thin left side. The same H pattern can be seen in jeans taken from Charles Barbie's home.
In this case, because I was able to positively identify those pants, I could get on the stand and say, those pants were the ones worn by the bank robber. I can't tell you who the bank robber was. And so it's very strong circumstantial evidence.
Barbie couldn't have known it, but the jeans he wore during the first bank robbery helped identify him and his fellow bombers. In March of 1997, the trio went on trial. It was later found that one of the jurors was sympathetic to the Phineas priesthood's anti-government beliefs. But at the second trial, 3 months later, the jury returned guilty verdicts, and Vern Morrell, Charles Barbie, and Robert Berry were given mandatory life terms. They claimed to the end that the trial was political, but investigators disagreed, and to prove it, they were able to present a well-worn pair of blue jeans. The same pair of blue jeans that were worn during the bank robbery.
I thought the FBI lab did an excellent job by being able to come up and compare those to the photograph and identify them positively as the jeans the bank robber wore. And that's the only time I ever know it to have been done. It may have done some other case someplace, but I'm not aware of it. That was pretty amazing.
They were basically robbers. They wanted the money. They're criminals. They didn't believe in our government, that's true. They didn't believe in abortion, and that's true. They didn't believe in banks, that's true. But they're common criminals. They did these to get money.
The first person to disappear from Ashwood wasn't reported missing for 3 days. Not because nobody cared. Because everyone believed he had simply gone into the forest, just as he had done 100 times before. The town had always lived beside the trees, and the trees had always kept their own secrets. Ashwood was the kind of place people drove through without remembering. One main road, one gas station, one diner that served the same coffee every morning for 40 years, a church bell that rang every Sunday, a river that cut through the valley like a scar. Nothing remarkable, nothing worth noticing, until October arrived. The rain started before sunrise. Cold, steady, relentless. Sheriff Ethan Ward watched drops race across the windshield of his patrol truck while dispatch repeated the same message for the 3rd time. Possible missing hiker. Male. 58. Last seen entering Black Pine Trail. Ward answered with a single word. Copy. He had handled dozens of missing person reports over the years. Most ended the same way. A twisted ankle. A dead phone battery. Someone taking the long route home. Ashwood was quiet. Predictable. Safe. At least that was what people liked to believe. The trail began beside an abandoned ranger station where peeling paint clung stubbornly to weathered wood. Fallen leaves covered the path, hiding footprints beneath layers of red and gold. Deputy Claire Morgan waited beside a parked pickup truck. Family? Ward asked. The man's wife. Anything unusual? Claire hesitated. She said he left before dawn. Ward nodded. And he wasn't carrying hunting gear. So, he never entered these woods without it. Ward looked toward the trees. Dark. Silent. Almost perfectly still despite the wind. They followed the trail for nearly a mile. Nothing. No backpack. No broken branches. No discarded equipment. Only rain washing away whatever the forest had remembered. Then Claire stopped. There. Half buried beneath wet leaves lay a leather notebook. Ward picked it up carefully. The cover had swollen from rain, but the pages inside remained surprisingly dry. The first half contained ordinary notes. Weather. Bird sightings. Sketches of mushrooms. The observations of someone who loved the wilderness. The final pages were different. The handwriting became rushed. Uneven. As if written by someone struggling to keep their hands steady. One sentence filled an entire page. Something is walking behind me. Ward turned another page. Blank. Another. Blank. Then, near the end, one final line. It knows my name. The sheriff closed the notebook. Neither detective spoke. The forest suddenly felt much larger. Search teams arrived within the hour. Volunteers spread across the hills carrying radios and bright orange flags. Dogs followed scent trails that ended without explanation. Drones scanned the canopy. Helicopters circled overhead. Nothing. By sunset, the missing man had simply vanished. No campsite, no blood, no struggle, no sign that he had ever walked beyond the place where the notebook had been found. Ashwood tried to continue as normal. Children still walked to school. Farmers still opened their barns before dawn. The diner still served pie every afternoon. But conversations changed. People lowered their voices. Doors locked earlier. Porch lights stayed on until morning. 3 nights later, another discovery changed everything. An elderly woman cleaning her attic found a wooden chest hidden beneath loose floorboards. Inside rested dozens of letters tied together with faded blue ribbon. None had ever been mailed. Every envelope carried the same address. To whoever finds this before it's too late. Claire brought the box directly to Ward. You should read the first one. He carefully unfolded the oldest letter. The paper cracked along its folds. The ink had faded to brown. There was no signature. No date. Only words. If you are reading this, then the promise has already been broken. We believed silence would protect the town. We were wrong. Ward frowned. Another page. Do not search for the missing after sunset. Another. They are never where you think they are. The sheriff leaned back slowly. Who wrote these? Claire shook her head. No idea. How old are they? The paper is at least 30 years old. Ward looked toward the evidence board. 1 missing man. 1 abandoned notebook. 1 hidden box of letters. No connections. At least none they could see. Outside, thunder rolled across the valley. Rain struck the station windows harder than before. The lights flickered once, then stabilized. Dispatch suddenly called over the radio. Sheriff. Ward picked up the handset. Go ahead. We've got another report. His stomach tightened. Missing person? A pause. Yes. Who? A 16-year-old girl. When was she last seen? About 20 minutes ago. Where? Dispatch answered quietly. Black Pine Trail. Ward closed his eyes for one brief second. Then he reached for his jacket. The forest had taken someone else. And this time, it had happened before the first search had even ended. The rain had erased almost every footprint before the search team reached Black Pine Trail. Sheriff Ethan Ward stepped out of his truck and swept his flashlight across the entrance. Water dripped from the pine branches in slow, steady rhythms. Every shadow seemed alive. Every gust of wind carried the sound of something moving just beyond sight. The missing girl's bicycle lay on its side, near the trailhead. Its front wheel was still spinning. Deputy Claire Morgan crouched beside it. No sign of a struggle. Ward examined the muddy ground. No drag marks. No blood. No broken branches. It doesn't make sense. Nothing did. The girl's backpack rested against a large oak tree only 20 feet away. Inside were schoolbooks, a half-finished bottle of water, headphones, and a folded photograph. Ward unfolded it carefully. 5 teenagers stood smiling beside the old Ashwood Bridge during the previous summer. One face had been circled in black ink. The missing girl. On the back, someone had written a single sentence. Don't tell anyone what we found. Claire looked over his shoulder. Found what? Ward folded the photograph. That's what we're going to find out. The search expanded before dawn. Nearly 50 volunteers entered the forest. Thermal drones scanned the hills. Mounted officers searched narrow trails. Search dogs repeatedly stopped near the same abandoned ranger station before refusing to continue deeper into the woods. The handlers couldn't explain it. The dogs simply refused. Not frightened, confused. As though the scent they followed had suddenly disappeared into thin air. Back at the station, Claire began interviewing the missing girl's closest friends. Most gave ordinary answers. She loved photography. She planned to leave Ashwood after graduation. She had recently become interested in old local history. Nothing unusual. Until one friend hesitated. There was something. Claire leaned forward. What? About 2 weeks ago. Go on. We found an old cabin. Where? Near Black Pine Trail. Did you go inside? The teenager nodded. There wasn't much. What did you see? Old furniture, a fireplace, and a locked basement door. Claire remained silent. The next day, the teenager swallowed hard. Someone had nailed every window shut. Who? I don't know. You reported it? No. Why not? The teenager looked genuinely afraid. Because nobody believed us. Ward drove to the county records office that afternoon. Dust-covered shelves filled with maps dating back nearly a century. An elderly clerk listened patiently while Ward described the abandoned cabin. I think I know the place. She disappeared into a storage room and returned carrying a rolled survey map. She spread it across the table. There. A faded black square marked a structure deep inside black pine forest. No owner. Not anymore. When was it abandoned? The clerk adjusted her glasses. Officially? Ward nodded. 1978. What happened? Fire. Ward frowned. The cabin burned? No. The family living there. Silence filled the archive. They all died. She slowly shook her head. They disappeared. The cabin stood exactly where the map indicated, half hidden beneath vines and fallen trees. Its roof sagged under decades of snow and rain. Broken windows stared into the forest like empty eyes. Ward pushed open the front door. The smell of damp would fill the air. Dust coated every surface. Yet something felt wrong. The dust wasn't everywhere. A narrow path crossed the floor. Fresh. Someone had walked through recently. Claire noticed it too. They're careful. They don't want to leave prints. The trail ended at the basement door. Heavy chains wrapped around the handle. Brand new chains. Someone had locked it recently. Ward examined the padlock. No rust. No weather damage. It wasn't here long. Claire looked at him. You thinking what I'm thinking? He nodded. Get the bolt cutters. Minutes later, the lock snapped open. The chains fell to the floor with a metallic crash. Ward pulled the basement door open. Cold air rushed upward. His flashlight illuminated steep wooden stairs disappearing into darkness. No smell. No sound. Nothing. They descended slowly. Step by step. The basement proved larger than expected. Stone walls. Concrete floor. Empty shelves. No furniture. No personal belongings. Only one object stood in the center of the room. A wooden chair. Nothing else. Claire slowly circled it. That's unsettling. Ward said nothing. He noticed scratches covering the concrete floor. Hundreds of them. Thin. Parallel. As though heavy boxes had repeatedly been dragged across the basement over many years. The scratches all pointed toward the back wall. Ward walked over. Tapped the concrete. Solid. Then another section. Hollow. He looked at Claire. She already understood. There has to be another room. By evening, construction crews arrived with demolition equipment. Carefully removing part of the wall revealed a narrow opening just wide enough for one person. Ward entered first. His flashlight revealed shelves lining both sides of a hidden chamber. Boxes. Dozens of them. Each carefully labeled. Not with names. With years. 1981. 1986. 1994. 2003. 2011. Claire whispered. Those aren't case numbers. Ward slowly opened the nearest box. Inside were ordinary objects. A wristwatch. A train ticket. A child's marble. A faded birthday card. A silver necklace. Personal belongings. Preserved with extraordinary care. He opened another. More keepsakes. Photographs. Letters. Coins. Small fragments of ordinary lives. None appeared valuable. Yet someone had stored them for decades. At the far end of the chamber stood an old wooden desk. One drawer remained unlocked. Inside lay a leather-bound notebook. Ward opened it. Every page listed dates. Nothing else. Just dates. Hundreds of them. One entry had been written only 3 days earlier. The exact morning the first man disappeared. Ward stared at the final line. Below it, There was empty space, as though whoever kept the notebook had been waiting to write the next date. Somewhere above them, the old cabin groaned as the evening wind pushed through broken walls. Claire looked toward the narrow passage they had just entered. Neither detective spoke. For the first time since the disappearances began, both understood the same terrifying possibility. Someone had been preparing for these events long before the town realized anything was wrong. The notebook never left Ethan Ward's hands. Even after returning to the station. Even after midnight. Even after the evidence technicians photographed every page and confirmed what he already knew. There were no names. No explanations. Only dates.
Hundreds of them.
Each separated by months. Sometimes years. No pattern that anyone could recognize. Until Claire pinned every date onto the investigation board. She stepped back. You seeing it? Ward studied the board. At first it looked like chaos. Random years. Random months. Random days. Then his eyes caught something. They're all Fridays. Claire nodded. Not every Friday. But almost. She placed another sheet beside the timeline. Historical weather reports. Every highlighted date matched one condition. Heavy rain. Dense fog. Or both. Ward looked toward the dark station window. Outside, rain continued falling.
Slow. Steady.
Relentless. Exactly like the weather described in the reports. By sunrise, news of the abandoned cabin had spread across Ashwood. People gathered outside the diner. At the gas station. In church parking lots. Nobody spoke loudly. The town had changed. Parents walked children to school instead of letting them ride bicycles alone. Store owners locked their doors before sunset. The hiking trails were closed indefinitely. Yet one man seemed completely unconcerned. Walter Grayson, 78 years old. Retired schoolteacher. Born in Ashwood. Never moved away. Ward found him sitting on the porch of a white farmhouse, overlooking the valley. Walter poured 2 cups of coffee before Ward even introduced himself. I figured you'd come. You know why I'm here? The old man smiled faintly. You found the cabin. Ward's expression hardened. You've been there. Many times. Why didn't you tell anyone? Walter stared toward the distant tree line. Because nobody asked the right question. And what is the right question? The old man remained silent for nearly a minute. Finally, he spoke. You keep asking who built the cabin. Ward waited. You should be asking. Why nobody ever tore it down. County records showed the cabin had been scheduled for demolition 4 separate times. Each project had been canceled. Budget cuts. Equipment failures. Legal disputes. Storm damage. Different reasons.
Different decades.
Yet the result was always the same. The cabin remained standing. Ward didn't believe in coincidences. Not anymore. Claire spent the afternoon cataloging everything recovered from the hidden room. 42 boxes. Hundreds of personal belongings. Each carefully preserved. One discovery stopped her cold. Every object belonged to someone who had once lived in Ashwood. Old school yearbooks confirmed it. Family photographs confirmed it. Town records confirmed it. The owners weren't strangers. They were neighbors.
Teachers.
Mechanics. Nurses. Shopkeepers. People the town had almost forgotten. Claire carried the list straight to Ward. They all have one thing in common. What? They disappeared. Ward looked up sharply. Missing persons? She nodded. Going back almost 50 years. He flipped through the files. Some cases had been solved. Others had not. Some people had supposedly moved away. Others had been declared dead despite never being found. Yet every one of them had belongings stored inside the hidden chamber. Someone had collected them.
Carefully.
Patiently. For decades. Late that evening, the power failed. The station fell into darkness. Emergency lights flickered on seconds later. Dispatch switched to backup generators. Officers checked transformers throughout town. Nothing appeared damaged. Ward walked outside. The entire valley had gone dark. Only one light remained. The old church at the center of Ashwood. Its bell tower windows glowed softly against the rain. Claire joined him. Generator? Ward shook his head. That church doesn't have one. Both detectives stared across the empty streets. The light inside the bell tower remained perfectly steady. Not bright.
Not dim. Simply there.
Then the church bell rang.
Once.
A deep sound rolled across the valley. Again. Another slow chime echoed through the rain. Then silence. No scheduled service. No funeral. No celebration. Just two lonely bells disappearing into the night. The next morning they visited the church. Father Thomas greeted them warmly. I was expecting you. Ward looked toward the bell tower. Who rang the bell last night? The priest frowned. No one. The whole town heard it. Father Thomas slowly removed a ring of old keys from his pocket. Come with me. They climbed the narrow wooden stairs into the tower. Dust covered every beam. Spider webs stretched between the supports. The bell rope hung perfectly still. Untouched. When was it last used? Sunday. Ward examined the floor beneath it. No footprints. No disturbance. Nothing. Then Claire noticed something carved into one of the oldest support beams. Tiny letters, almost invisible beneath layers of varnish. Ward brushed away the dust. The carving read, "Keep the light burning." He froze. The exact same sentence appeared inside the notebook from the cabin, and in one of the letters found in the attic. Claire whispered, "Someone wanted us to connect them." Ward wasn't so sure. It felt less like someone leaving clues, and more like someone repeating a promise. That afternoon, the forensic laboratory finally completed testing on the oldest letter.
No fingerprints.
No modern DNA. Only one unexpected result. The paper itself. It hadn't been manufactured locally, or even recently. The fibers matched specialty stationery produced nearly 60 years earlier by a small paper mill less than 20 miles from Ashwood. The mill had closed decades ago after a massive fire. Ward stared at the report. Another abandoned place. Another forgotten story. Another thread leading backward instead of forward. Every answer seemed buried beneath another layer of history. Every discovery suggested that whatever had begun in Ashwood hadn't started with the missing hiker, or the missing teenager. It had been unfolding quietly for generations. Outside the station, the rain finally stopped. For the first time in days, sunlight broke through the clouds. Across the valley, the forest shimmered with fresh drops of water. Peaceful, beautiful, almost inviting. Ward watched the trees from his office window. Somewhere beyond that green horizon stood an abandoned cabin. Hidden beneath its floor was a room that should never have existed. And somewhere beyond that room, someone else already knew the detectives were getting closer. Someone was watching the station. Ethan Ward realized it just after sunrise. Not because he saw a face. Because of the coffee. Every morning for nearly 12 years he had stopped at Miller's Diner before beginning work. Same booth. Same black coffee. Same quiet 10 minutes before the phone started ringing. This morning, the waitress placed a folded newspaper beside his cup. I think this is yours. Ward frowned. I didn't bring a newspaper. It was already on your table. She walked away before he could ask another question. The paper was yesterday's edition. Nothing unusual about the front page. Nothing unusual about the weather. Nothing unusual about the local sports section. Until he reached page 6. A red circle had been drawn around a small article about the missing hiker. Below the article, someone had written 5 words in careful block letters. You are looking backward.
No signature. No fingerprints visible.
Just the message. Claire examined it 20 minutes later under the station lights. The ink is fresh. Ward nodded. It was written after yesterday's paper was printed. So whoever left it knew where you'd be. Exactly. She looked toward the diner across the street. Someone has been watching your routine. Security cameras from the diner offered little help. The image quality was poor. Customers came and went continuously. Delivery drivers, retired couples, high school students, construction workers. One person stood out. At 6:14 a.m., a man wearing a dark raincoat entered the diner. He never ordered food, never removed his hood. He walked directly to Ward's usual booth, placed something on the table, and left less than 20 seconds later. The cameras never captured his face. His hands remained inside his coat pockets. Even his height was difficult to judge. He knew exactly where to go, Claire said. Ward slowed the footage. The stranger paused briefly before leaving. Not long enough to be noticeable. Long enough to look toward the front window. Toward the parking lot. Toward Ward's patrol truck. He knew I wasn't there yet. Claire folded her arms. So, he wanted you to find the message. The sentence stayed with Ward throughout the day. You are looking backward. He pinned the note beside photographs from the cabin. Old letters. The notebook of dates. Recovered belongings. Every clue pointed into the past. What if that was exactly what someone wanted? He walked to the evidence room and opened the box containing the missing teenager's backpack. Inside, beneath the schoolbooks, technicians had found nothing unusual. Or so they believed. Ward emptied everything onto the table himself. Notebook. Pens. Calculator. Wallet. A paperback novel. As he picked up the novel, something slipped from between the pages. A folded library receipt. Not overdue. Not remarkable. Except for the title of the borrowed book. Ashwood Land Survey, 1964 Expansion Project. Claire looked over his shoulder. That's oddly specific. Ward checked the public library database. The book had never been returned. The librarian remembered it immediately. It disappeared about 3 weeks ago. Who checked it out? She shook her head. The borrowing card was removed. Removed? It was glued into the back cover. She showed them an empty rectangle where the card should have been. Someone took it. Ward scanned the archive shelves. If I wanted to find another copy, there isn't one. It was printed only for the county planning office. So, where would it be now? The librarian smiled apologetically. If someone stole it, then it's gone. County engineering offices stored thousands of original survey maps. After several hours of searching, Claire uncovered a duplicate set. Large sheets covered an entire conference table. Roads, creeks, property boundaries, utility lines. Everything surveyed in 1964. Ward compared the old map with a current satellite image. At first glance, they matched perfectly. Then he noticed something. Black Pine Trail. It wasn't there. Instead, another road appeared. A narrow gravel access route leading deeper into the forest. Toward a location marked only by a handwritten note. Maintenance Facility C. What happened to it? Claire asked. Ward checked later editions. The road vanished from maps printed after 1967. No explanation. No demolition record. It simply disappeared. By late afternoon, they located a retired county surveyor named Harold Benson. 90 years old. Sharp memory. Unsteady hands. He studied the map for less than a minute. I remember this. Ward leaned forward. Maintenance facility, see? Harold nodded slowly. It wasn't really a maintenance building. What was it? A records depot. What kind of records? The old man looked uncertain. We weren't told. You worked there? No. I only helped survey the road. What happened? They closed it. When? Not long after construction finished. Claire exchanged a glance with Ward. Why build it just to abandon it? Harold stared through the window for several seconds. I asked the same question. And my supervisor told me to forget I'd ever seen the place. The forgotten access road was difficult to find. Trees had reclaimed most of it. Roots split the cracked pavement. Thick moss covered broken asphalt. Nature had spent nearly 60 years erasing every sign that vehicles once traveled here. Yet beneath the leaves, the road remained. Ward drove slowly. The forest grew denser with every mile. Eventually, the road ended at a chain-link fence. Most of it had collapsed. Behind it stood a concrete building almost completely hidden by vines. No signs.
No windows.
Just a steel door stained with rust. Claire whispered, This doesn't look like a records office. Ward agreed. It looks like someone wanted it forgotten. The padlock hanging from the door had long since corroded away. He pushed gently. The heavy door opened with a low metallic groan that echoed through the silent woods. Inside, sunlight filtered through cracks in the ceiling. Dust floated lazily through the air. Rows of empty metal shelves stretched across the room. Boxes once stored here were gone. Only outlines remained where decades of dust had settled around them. Someone had cleared the building years earlier. Almost. Near the back wall, a single filing cabinet still stood. Its bottom drawer refused to open. Claire knelt beside it. Something's blocking it. Together they pulled harder. The drawer finally slid free with a violent screech. Inside lay only one file. One folder. No label. No classification number. Ward opened it carefully. The first page contained a list of names. 23 names. Some had been crossed out. Others circled. At the very bottom of the page, written in different handwriting than the rest, appeared a sentence that made the room suddenly feel much colder. The next generation must never know why Ashwood was chosen. The folder remained open on the hood of the patrol truck. 23 names. No dates of birth.
No addresses.
Only names. Some had neat black lines drawn through them. Others were circled with blue ink. 3 names had small stars beside them. Sheriff Ethan Ward read the list again. None belonged to the missing hiker. None belonged to the missing teenager. But he recognized several from old newspaper archives. Former mayors, a retired surveyor, a teacher, the owner of a sawmill that had closed decades earlier. People connected only by the fact that they had all lived in Ashwood at different times. Claire pointed toward the final sentence. The next generation must never know why Ashwood was chosen. What do you think it means? Ward closed the folder. I think someone expected this file to disappear. They searched the abandoned records depot for another 2 hours. Most filing cabinets stood empty. Old electrical wiring hung from the ceiling. Broken fluorescent lights covered the floor. Every room appeared stripped years ago, as though a careful cleanup had removed anything useful. Then Claire stopped in front of a faded bulletin board. There. One corner of a yellowing photograph remained pinned beneath a rusted thumbtack. The rest had been torn away. Ward carefully removed it. Only part of the picture survived. A concrete building. A line of parked trucks. For people standing together. 3 faces had been ripped from the photograph. Only one remained. An elderly woman smiling directly at the camera. On the back someone had written a single word. Martha. Finding Martha took less time than expected. Ashwood was small. Everyone knew everyone. Martha Collins lived alone in a weathered farmhouse overlooking the river. She opened the door before Ward knocked. I've been expecting someone eventually. You know why we're here? She smiled sadly. I suppose you found the old depot. Ward didn't answer. She invited them inside. The living room walls were covered with framed photographs stretching back more than 50 years. Family reunions. School graduations. Harvest festivals. One photograph immediately caught Ward's attention. It showed the same concrete building from the torn picture. Only this time the image was complete. Nearly 30 people stood together. Engineers. Surveyors. Construction workers. Martha noticed where he was looking. Opening day. You worked there? For 6 months. What was the depot? She remained silent for several moments. It stored maps. Only maps. And journals. What kind of journals? I never read them. You could have. She nodded. But we were told not to. By whom? The county. Ward placed the folder on the table. Martha's expression changed the instant she saw the names. I wondered where that went. You've seen it before. Years ago. What is it? She leaned back slowly. A transfer list. A transfer to where? I don't know. No one ever explained. She looked toward the rain-covered fields outside her window. They simply said some people would continue the work. What work? Martha shook her head. That question was never answered. As evening settled over Ashwood, Thick clouds gathered once again above Black Pine Forest. The air felt unusually still. Even the birds had gone quiet. Back at the station, Claire spread every recovered map across the conference table. Old property records, survey maps, hand-drawn sketches. She layered them one above another. Roads appeared, disappeared. Creeks shifted. Property lines changed. Then something unexpected emerged. The abandoned cabin, the records depot, and the old ranger station all sat almost exactly the same distance apart. Ward measured again. A perfect triangle. He stared at it for a long moment. It wasn't random. Claire nodded. Someone planned all of this. She reached for another map dated nearly 70 years earlier. Hidden beneath faded pencil marks was a narrow footpath connecting all three locations. The path no longer existed. Trees had reclaimed it decades ago. But on paper, it remained. Following the route with his finger, Ward noticed one final marking. A small circle at the center of the triangle. No building, no road, no description. Just a handwritten note almost erased by time. Old observatory. Claire frowned. I've lived here my whole life. I've never heard of an observatory. Ward folded the map carefully. Tomorrow we change direction. No more looking at abandoned buildings. No more chasing old records. He looked toward the dark outline of Black Pine Forest beyond the station windows. If that observatory is still there, it may be the only place nobody expected us to search. Morning arrived beneath a blanket of low-gray clouds. The rain had finally stopped, leaving Black Pine Forest wrapped in a heavy silence. Water dripped from the branches with slow, rhythmic precision. Mist clung to the ground, turning every fallen log into a pale shadow. Sheriff Ethan Ward and Claire Morgan parked where the old survey map ended. Beyond that point, there was no road, only forest. Claire unfolded the faded map one more time. The observatory should be less than a mile east. Ward looked into the trees. If it's still standing. They crossed a shallow creek and climbed a narrow ridge almost hidden beneath decades of fallen leaves. The farther they walked, the stranger the landscape became. Massive stone markers appeared at irregular intervals, each worn smooth by time. None carried names, only simple geometric symbols carved deep into the granite. Circles, triangles, stars. Claire brushed moss from one of the stones. These aren't trail markers. Ward nodded. They're too deliberate. They continued uphill until the forest suddenly opened into a broad clearing. Nature had reclaimed almost everything. Broken stone walls lay scattered beneath vines. A collapsed dome rested at the center of the clearing like the shell of a forgotten giant. The observatory, Claire whispered. Only fragments remained. Rusted metal beams protruded through thick ivy. Pieces of cracked glass glittered among the weeds. Whatever had once stood here had been abandoned for generations. Ward stepped carefully through the ruins. The main chamber still held a massive circular platform where an old telescope had once rotated toward the sky. Someone had removed the instrument long ago. Only its foundation remained. Claire noticed fresh footprints in the damp soil. Not ours. Ward knelt. The impressions were clear. Heavy boots. One person. Recent. They came after the rain stopped. So we're not alone. A cold breeze swept through the broken dome. For a brief moment, the clearing felt alive again. Ward searched the surrounding walls. Most had collapsed, but one section remained intact. Embedded in the stone was a rusted brass plaque. He wiped away years of dirt. The inscription slowly appeared. Ashwood Astronomical Station. Established 1931. Below the title, a smaller line had almost disappeared. Knowledge belongs to every generation. Protect it well. Claire frowned. That's an odd thing to write on an observatory. Ward agreed. It sounds less like science. And more like a promise. They explored the remaining rooms. Most were empty. A library reduced to broken shelves. A workshop filled with rusted tools. A narrow office where rain had destroyed nearly every document. Then Claire called from the far end of the building.
Ethan.
He hurried over. Behind a fallen bookcase, a trapdoor had been concealed beneath layers of debris. The iron ring handle was badly rusted but intact. Together they lifted it. Cold air drifted upward. A stone staircase descended into darkness. Ward switched on his flashlight. The beam revealed dry walls. No standing water. Someone had built the underground chamber to last. Step by careful step, they descended. The room below was surprisingly small. No larger than a classroom. Unlike the abandoned depot or the hidden cabin, this place had not been stripped clean. Dust covered every surface. Wooden cabinets lined the walls. Glass jars filled with carefully labeled rock samples rested on shelves. Star charts hung inside cracked frames. A large oak desk stood in the center. Everything suggested scholars had worked here. Not soldiers. Not officials. Researchers. Claire opened the first cabinet. Dozens of notebooks. Each carefully numbered. Ward examined one at random. Instead of observations about crime or disappearances, it contained sketches of the night sky. Meteor showers. Planetary movements. Lunar eclipses. The entries continued for decades. Another notebook recorded weather conditions with astonishing precision. Temperature.
Wind.
Rainfall. River levels. The observatory had quietly documented the valley for generations.
Claire smiled for the first time that day.
This is beautiful. Ward nodded. It feels peaceful. Then he noticed something different. Hidden beneath the desk lay a narrow metal box. Unlike everything else in the room, it was locked. The key rested beside it, almost as if someone expected the box to be opened eventually. Ward unlocked it. Inside was a single envelope. Across the front, written in elegant handwriting, were just 6 words. For the first honest visitor. Neither of them spoke. Ward carefully opened the envelope. Inside rested a folded letter. The paper had yellowed with age, but remained remarkably well preserved. The first sentence read, "If this room has survived, then Ashwood still has people willing to ask questions before making judgments." Ward continued reading in silence. The letter spoke not of secrets to be hidden, but of knowledge to be preserved, maps, weather records, journals, and observations gathered across generations so future residents could better understand the valley they called home. There was no confession, no conspiracy, only a quiet belief that memory mattered. When Ward finally lowered the page, sunlight broke through the cracked dome above, sending a narrow beam of light across the room. Dust drifted through it like tiny stars. For the first time since the investigation had begun, the ruins no longer felt haunted. They felt remembered. The letter ended without a signature. Only a single line appeared beneath the final paragraph. A town survives because someone remembers what others forget. Ethan Ward folded the fragile paper and slipped it back into its envelope. The underground room suddenly felt different. Not mysterious. Not threatening. Simply forgotten. Claire continued examining the shelves lining the walls. Every notebook had been numbered. Every weather log had been dated. Every map had been carefully repaired by hand whenever its edges began to fray. Whoever had worked here believed that preserving knowledge was as important as discovering it. She opened another cabinet. Inside rested dozens of glass plates used for early astronomical photography. Most had faded beyond recognition. One remained remarkably clear. It showed the night sky above Ashwood nearly a century earlier. Across the bottom margin someone had written, "The valley changes slowly. Watch the land before you watch the people." Claire smiled. "I like that." Ward nodded. "It sounds like advice." They climbed back into daylight carrying only copies of the letter and several damaged survey maps. Nothing else was disturbed. The observatory deserved better than to become another abandoned crime scene. Outside, the afternoon sun finally broke through the clouds. The forest looked completely different. Birdsong returned. A breeze carried the scent of pine across the clearing. For the first time in days, Ashwood felt alive instead of silent. As they prepared to leave, Claire noticed something reflecting in the grass. A small brass marker lay half-buried beneath moss. She picked it up. It was no larger than a pocket watch. One side showed the outline of the old observatory. The other carried a simple inscription: Ashwood Heritage Society. Ward frowned. I've never heard of it. Neither have I. Back in town, they searched through municipal archives until sunset. Eventually, an elderly librarian disappeared into a basement storage room and returned carrying a faded membership ledger. There wasn't much left, she admitted. The society dissolved years ago. Ward carefully opened the book. The first pages listed volunteers: teachers, carpenters, doctors, students, people from every part of town. Their purpose was surprisingly ordinary: restoring historic buildings, collecting oral histories, preserving old maps, protecting local wildlife. Ashwood Heritage Society had never been secret. It had simply faded away as generations passed. Tucked into the final page was a folded announcement: Community Restoration Day, Saturday, May 14th. Volunteers welcome. Below the printed text, someone had written in blue ink: History disappears quietly. Save what you can. Ward looked at Claire. Maybe that's been the point all along. She closed the ledger gently. We spent days expecting hidden conspiracies, and found people trying to preserve their town instead. That evening the sun set in brilliant shades of orange across the valley. Children rode bicycles through quiet streets. The diner filled with familiar conversations. The church bell rang the hour. Life moved at its usual pace. Ward stood outside the station watching light fade across black pine forest. The woods no longer looked threatening. They looked ancient, patient, full of stories that belonged to anyone willing to listen. Ashwood had changed him, not because it had given him answers, but because it had reminded him that every town carries two histories, the one written in books. As the first stars appeared above the valley, a cool wind swept through the trees. The forest whispered softly in the fading light, not as a warning, but as a promise that there would always be another story waiting beyond the next trail. Autumn settled gently over Ashwood. Within a week, the last traces of rain disappeared, replaced by crisp mornings and long afternoons filled with golden light. Visitors returned to the hiking trails. Fishermen gathered beside the river before sunrise. Children filled the schoolyard with laughter that echoed through the valley. Life looked normal again. Yet Ethan Ward knew better. Not because another person had vanished. Not because another strange message had appeared. Because questions still remained. One evening he unlocked the evidence room and spread every recovered map across a long wooden table. The abandoned ranger station, the observatory, the old records depot, the forgotten cabin. Each place represented a different chapter in Ashwood's history, yet they all shared one remarkable detail. Every building had been constructed within 12 years of one another. It was too precise to ignore. Claire entered carrying 2 cardboard archive boxes. I found building permits. Ward looked up. Anything useful? She handed him a yellowed document. The same architect signed every project. No way. I'm serious. Ward read the signature. Jonathan Mercer. The name meant nothing to either of them. No street carried it. No monument honored it. No history book mentioned him. Yet one man had designed nearly every forgotten building surrounding Ashwood. They searched county records until nearly midnight. Finally, buried inside a tax ledger from 1958, they found a final entry. Jonathan Mercer. Occupation: civil engineer. Residence: Ashwood. Status: relocated. No destination. No explanation. He simply disappeared from the records. The following morning, Ward visited the oldest cemetery in town. If Mercer had remained in Ashwood, there would be a grave. There wasn't. Instead, the groundskeeper remembered something unexpected. My grandfather talked about him. What did he say? He built things that lasted. Anything else? The old man thought for a moment. He believed every town should leave something behind for the people who hadn't been born yet. Ward smiled. That's an unusual philosophy. So was he. Later that afternoon, Claire uncovered one final notebook hidden inside the observatory archives. Unlike the weather journals, this one wasn't scientific. It contained sketches, buildings, bridges, walking paths, public gardens. Every drawing focused on the same idea, creating places where strangers might eventually meet. At the very end, a handwritten paragraph filled the last page. If these places survive longer than I do, then I have succeeded. People rarely remember the architect. They remember how a place made them feel. Ward closed the notebook. For the first time, Jonathan Mercer no longer seemed like another mystery waiting to be solved. He felt like someone who had quietly shaped an entire town before allowing history to forget his name. Days turned into weeks. Volunteers began restoring the observatory. Local carpenters repaired broken beams. Students cataloged surviving journals. Teachers organized historical exhibits. No one argued about who deserved credit. Everyone simply worked. One Saturday morning, Ward stood beneath the repaired dome as sunlight streamed through newly installed glass panels. Children pointed excitedly toward a restored telescope aimed at the pale blue sky. An elderly woman donated family photographs. A retired mechanic rebuilt the observatory's original clock. The building slowly came back to life. Claire smiled as she watched visitors wander through the restored halls. Funny. What? We spent all this time looking for secrets. Ward nodded and found a community. Outside, the bells of Ashwood rang across the valley. The sound drifted over the forest, across the river, and toward the distant hills where forgotten roads had once disappeared beneath towering pines. The valley remained full of stories. Some had been lost. Some had been preserved. Others were only now being discovered by people willing to listen before drawing conclusions. As evening settled over Ashwood, the observatory opened its doors for the first public stargazing event in nearly 60 years. Families gathered beneath the clear autumn sky. Children took turns looking through the restored telescope. One by one, they gasped as Saturn's rings came into view. Above them, countless stars stretched across the darkness. Silent, ancient, patient. The same stars that generations before had watched over the valley, the forgotten buildings, and the people who believed that preserving history was just as important as making it. Ethan Ward looked upward for a long moment before quietly switching off the observatory lights. The night became brighter. Sometimes he realized the clearest way to see what matters is simply to let the darkness reveal the sky. Winter arrived earlier than anyone expected. The first snow fell overnight, covering Ashwood in a blanket of white that softened every rooftop, every fence, every forgotten trail leading into black pine forest. By sunrise, the valley looked untouched. The observatory had become the busiest building in town. School groups arrived every Wednesday. Travelers stopped to admire the restored dome. Historians volunteered to organize the journals recovered from the underground archive. What had once been a ruin slowly became the heart of the community again. Claire spent most afternoons cataloging the remaining notebooks. One evening she noticed something unusual. Every journal ended the same way. Not with a signature. Not with a farewell. Instead, each writer left a single question for whoever would read the next volume. What did you discover that we overlooked? There were dozens of different answers, written across generations. Some mentioned rare birds returning after harsh winters. Others described rivers changing course. One writer noted that an oak tree planted near the observatory had survived a lightning strike and continued growing stronger. No answer was dramatic. Yet, together they formed something remarkable. A conversation spanning nearly 80 years. Ward smiled as he read through the pages. They weren't writing history. Claire looked up. They were writing to the future. A week later, volunteers clearing snow from the eastern hillside uncovered the stone foundation of another forgotten structure. Unlike the observatory, almost nothing remained above ground. Only a weathered archway still stood. An iron plaque rested nearby beneath layers of ice. After carefully brushing away the snow, the inscription became visible. Ashwood Community Library. Opened 1938. The library had vanished from every modern map. No one under the age of 70 remembered seeing it. Yet old photographs confirmed that generations of children had once gathered there after school. The town council voted unanimously to preserve the site, not because it promised hidden answers, but because it represented another piece of Ashwood that deserved to be remembered. Spring returned slowly. The snow melted into quiet streams that flowed through the valley. Wildflowers appeared along trails that had been closed for years. Families once again explored the forest, this time with new signs explaining the history of the observatory, the old survey routes, and the people who had worked to preserve the land. Visitors often asked Ethan Ward the same question. "So, did you ever solve the mystery?" He usually smiled before answering. It depended on which mystery you meant. Some mysteries had answers. Others became something more valuable. Stories that reminded people to pay attention to the places they called home. On the anniversary of the observatory's reopening, the town gathered beneath a clear summer sky. Children carried handmade lanterns through the park. Local musicians played beneath strings of warm lights. The restored telescope pointed toward the rising moon. As darkness settled over the valley, Claire handed Ward a newly bound journal. The cover was blank. Inside, every page waited to be filled. "No title?" he asked. She shook her head. "You should write the first entry." Ward opened to the first page. He thought about the forgotten buildings, the weathered maps, the volunteers, the generations who had quietly preserved pieces of Ashwood without expecting recognition. Then he began to write. Every town leaves footprints. Some are carved into stone. Others live only in memory. The future depends on people willing to protect both. He closed the journal. Above the observatory, countless stars stretched across the sky exactly as they had for centuries. The valley had changed. New voices now filled places that had once stood silent. Old stories had found new listeners. And somewhere beyond the treeline, the wind moved gently through the pines, carrying echoes of the past, not as secrets waiting to be uncovered, but as memories that would never again be forgotten. Years passed almost unnoticed. The old observatory became part of everyday life in Ashwood. Children who had once visited on school trips returned as university students during their holidays. Volunteers continued restoring forgotten landmarks. Families donated photographs, letters, journals, and hand-drawn maps that had been tucked away in attics for decades. The town slowly rebuilt its own history. Not all at once. One story at a time. Sheriff Ethan Ward found himself spending less time inside the station and more time walking the quiet trails that crossed the valley. He carried a small notebook everywhere he went, adding observations much like the people who had worked in the observatory generations before. The first robin of spring. The river freezing a week later than usual. A family of foxes returning to the western ridge. Nothing dramatic. Everything meaningful. One cool September afternoon, Claire arrived carrying a weathered wooden box recently donated by the granddaughter of a former school principal. "There isn't much inside," she said. Ward lifted the lid. A compass. A fountain pen. A faded train ticket. Several black and white photographs. At the bottom rested a folded sheet of paper. The handwriting was elegant and carefully spaced. It was dated October 12, 1949. The letter wasn't addressed to anyone in particular. Instead, it read like a reflection. "If someone opens this years from now, I hope Ashwood is still a place where strangers greet one another, where children know the names of the hills around them, and where people choose preservation over convenience. Buildings can always be rebuilt. Community cannot." Ward looked up from the page. They thought far ahead. Claire smiled. They hoped someone would keep reading. That autumn, the Ashwood Heritage Society was officially reestablished. Teachers, students, retired engineers, carpenters, people from every corner of the town volunteered. No membership fees. No complicated rules. Only one purpose. protect the history of the valley, and pass it forward. The first project focused on restoring the old footpath linking the observatory, the former library site, and the river overlook. The trail had nearly disappeared beneath decades of fallen leaves and undergrowth. Volunteers spent weekends clearing brush, repairing stone steps, and placing small information signs describing the area's history. When the path reopened, families walked it together for the first time in generations. Children stopped to read every sign. Grandparents shared stories they had nearly forgotten. The trail became more than a route through the forest. It became a walk through memory. Late one evening, Ward climbed to the observatory alone. The restored dome rotated smoothly overhead. Stars filled the autumn sky with extraordinary clarity. History isn't only found in museums. Sometimes it survives in conversations, traditions, and the kindness of neighbors who refuse to let memories disappear. He closed the journal and stepped outside. The lights of Ashwood glowed softly below. Steady. Peaceful. The valley no longer felt like a place hiding unanswered questions. It felt like a place finally comfortable telling its own story. A cool breeze moved through the pines surrounding the hill. Somewhere in the distance, the church bell marked the passing hour. Ward smiled. For years he had searched for hidden meanings beneath every strange clue. Now he understood something much simpler. The greatest legacy a community can leave isn't a secret waiting to be uncovered. It's the decision to remember. As the observatory's light shone gently across the hillside, another generation of visitors climbed the stone path carrying notebooks, cameras, and quiet curiosity. Ashwood welcomed them the same way it had welcomed countless others before, with open skies, old stories, and the promise that every place has a history worth protecting for those who come after. By the 5th anniversary of the observatory's restoration, Ashwood had become known far beyond the valley. Not for mystery, not for forgotten ruins, but for the remarkable way an ordinary town had chosen to preserve its past. Historians visited every summer. University students volunteered to digitize old journals. Families from neighboring counties spent weekends walking the heritage trail, stopping at each restored landmark to read about the people who had once lived there. The town had discovered something unexpected. History was not a collection of dates. It was a collection of lives. One spring morning, a delivery truck arrived at the observatory carrying several wooden crates from a regional museum. Inside were carefully wrapped astronomical instruments on long-term loan, a brass sextant, an antique telescope, navigation charts dating back more than a century. Children crowded around the display cases during the opening exhibition, asking endless questions. How did people know where they were? How did they study stars without computers? Why did they keep writing everything down? Claire answered each question with the same smile, so someone after them could learn. The community journal continued to grow. Every visitor was invited to contribute a page. Some drew pictures of the valley. Others described favorite hiking trails. A retired pilot wrote about seeing Ashwood from above during autumn, when the forests turned brilliant shades of gold and crimson. A young student wrote only one sentence. "I want this place to look the same when my grandchildren visit." Ward paused on that page longer than any other. Sometimes the shortest words carried the greatest weight. As summer arrived, the Heritage Society completed its largest project yet. The old library site was rebuilt using the original foundation stones uncovered years earlier. Modern shelves filled the interior, but the architecture honored the historic design preserved in Jonathan Mercer's sketches. The opening ceremony brought together nearly the entire town. No speeches lasted long. No grand celebrations were needed. People simply walked through the building, smiling as they explored rooms that had once existed only in faded photographs. Children immediately claimed the reading corner beneath the tall windows. Older residents donated books that had been passed through generations of their families. The building quickly became more than a library. It became another meeting place. Another reminder that preservation was not about holding on to the past. It was about giving the future something meaningful to inherit. That evening, Ethan Ward returned to the observatory one final time before heading home. The dome rotated slowly toward the first stars appearing in the twilight sky. The journals rested safely inside their climate-controlled archive. The restored telescope pointed silently toward the heavens. Everything felt complete. He opened the community journal to a fresh page. After a long moment of thought, he wrote, "Places endure because people choose to care for them. Memory survives because someone decides it matters." If these pages are ever read decades from now, may they remind whoever follows that every town, no matter how small, holds stories worth protecting. Ward closed the journal and placed it carefully on the shelf beside volumes written generations before. Outside, the lights of Ashwood shimmered beneath a clear night sky. The wind moved gently through the pines. Church bells echoed faintly across the valley. Families laughed on quiet streets. Children pointed toward constellations they had learned to recognize through the observatory's telescope. The valley looked almost exactly as it had in the oldest photographs. And yet it had changed completely. Not because its buildings were different. Not because its roads had been rebuilt. But because the people who lived there had rediscovered the simple truth that had guided every generation before them. A community is strongest when it remembers where it came from, shares what it has learned, and leaves behind something worthy of those who will one day call it home. Above Ashwood, the stars continued their slow journey across the sky, silent witnesses to another chapter added to the long story of a small valley that chose not to let its history fade. The first snowfall of the year arrived just before dawn. By sunrise, Ashwood had disappeared beneath a quiet blanket of white. Roofs, fields, bridges, and forest trails blended into a single peaceful landscape that seemed untouched by time. Sheriff Ethan Ward walked slowly along the Heritage Trail before anyone else was awake. Fresh snow covered every footprint from the day before. The valley was silent except for the distant sound of the river moving beneath thin sheets of ice. He reached the observatory as the eastern sky began turning pale gold. The old dome stood proudly against the winter morning, its brass panels reflecting the first light of day. Years earlier, the building had been little more than a forgotten ruin hidden beneath vines and fallen stone. Now it had become the symbol of the town. Inside, volunteers had already decorated the entrance for the annual Winter Heritage Festival. Children would arrive later to build small telescopes from cardboard kits. Teachers would read excerpts from journals written nearly a century apart. Local musicians would perform beneath the restored dome. For one weekend every winter, the observatory belonged to everyone. Ward unlocked the front doors. The familiar scent of polished wood and old paper filled the entrance hall. He paused before the long bookshelf where dozens of community journals now rested. The earliest volumes had yellowed with age. The newest still smelled of fresh ink. Each represented another year of ordinary people choosing to leave something behind. He selected the oldest journal carefully. The cover had become worn after decades of handling. Inside, the first page contained a sentence that had survived every restoration. "Knowledge belongs to every generation. Protect it well." Ward smiled. He placed the journal back onto the shelf. The words had become more than a motto. They had become the foundation of Ashwood itself. By noon, the observatory buzzed with quiet excitement. Children raced between exhibits, carrying maps they had drawn themselves. Parents shared stories about grandparents whose photographs now hung inside the restored gallery. Visitors wandered slowly through displays describing the valley's changing landscape across nearly a century. Nothing in the exhibits promised hidden treasure. Nothing hinted at forgotten conspiracies. Instead, every display celebrated something much simpler: memory. One exhibit showed side-by-side photographs of the same oak tree taken 70 years apart. Another followed the seasonal migration of birds recorded by generations of volunteers. A third displayed handwritten weather journals whose observations now helped modern environmental researchers better understand the region. History had become useful, living, growing, exactly as Jonathan Mercer had once imagined. Late that afternoon, Claire found Ward standing beneath the observatory dome, watching children take turns looking through the telescope. "You've been quiet today." Ward laughed softly. "I'm thinking." Dangerous habit. He nodded toward the crowd. When we first started exploring those abandoned buildings, I thought we'd spend our careers solving mysteries. Claire followed his gaze. And instead, we helped people remember. Neither spoke for a while. The observatory echoed with laughter. Outside, snowflakes drifted slowly past the tall windows. The valley looked timeless once again. As evening approached, the festival ended with a tradition that had quickly become one of Ashwood's favorites. Every visitor received a small blank card. On one side, they wrote something they hoped future generations would never forget. On the other, they signed only their first name. The cards were placed inside a large wooden chest built from reclaimed beams recovered during the observatory restoration. The chest would remain sealed for 25 years. No one alive today would know which message would be read first. That uncertainty made the tradition special. History was no longer something inherited. It was something everyone helped create. Ward wrote only one sentence. Take care of the places that quietly take care of you. He folded the card, dropped it into the chest, closed the lid. Outside, church bells echoed gently across the snow-covered valley. The lights of Ashwood glowed warmly beneath the winter sky. Above them, countless stars appeared one by one, exactly as they had for centuries. Silent, patient, enduring. The observatory's dome slowly opened toward the heavens. Children gasped as the first constellation came into view. Parents looked upward beside them. For a few quiet moments, every conversation stopped. No one hurried. No one checked the time. The town simply stood together beneath the same sky that had watched over every generation before them. And in that shared silence, Ashwood's greatest story continued, not as a mystery waiting to be solved, but as a promise carried forward by everyone willing to remember. The wooden chest remained unopened. It sat inside a glass case near the entrance of the observatory, collecting nothing more than dust and curiosity. Every visitor paused before it. Every child asked the same question. What's inside? The answer never changed. Letters from people who believed the future would care enough to read them. When the 25th winter finally arrived, Ashwood gathered once again beneath a clear night sky. The children who had dropped handwritten notes into the chest were now adults. Some had become teachers. Some engineers. Some had left the valley for distant cities before eventually finding their way home. Others returned with children of their own. The observatory was full long before sunset. Outside, lanterns lined the heritage trail. Inside, every seat was occupied. Claire Morgan, now director of the Heritage Society, stepped toward the wooden chest. Her hair had turned silver. Her smile had not changed. She lifted the old brass key. The room fell silent. The lock clicked. The lid opened for the first time in 25 years. Hundreds of handwritten cards rested inside exactly as they had been placed decades earlier. No one searched for their own. Instead, children from the local school drew cards at random. The first read, plant trees whose shade you will never sit beneath. The second, if an old building still stands, ask why before asking how old it is. Another simply said, laughter filled the room. Some messages were thoughtful. Some were funny. Some had been written in shaky handwriting by children barely old enough to spell. Yet every card carried the same quiet hope that someone in the future would care enough to listen. Claire reached the final card. She recognized the handwriting immediately. Ethan Ward. She unfolded it carefully. Take care of the places that quietly take care of you. No one applauded. No one spoke. The silence itself felt like the perfect tribute. Outside, fresh snow began falling again. The observatory dome slowly opened as the telescope turned toward the winter sky. Children gathered beneath it exactly as their parents once had. The stars looked unchanged. The valley looked unchanged. But the people understood something their grandparents had always known. Communities are not remembered because they are famous. They are remembered because generation after generation chooses to leave them a little better than they were found. Long after the lights inside the observatory were switched off, the heritage trail remained softly illuminated by lanterns stretching through the quiet forest. Travelers walking the path could hear only the wind moving through the pines and the distant river flowing toward the sea. Ashwood no longer needed hidden secrets. It no longer needed forgotten mysteries. Its greatest legacy had become something far more enduring. A town where ordinary people protected ordinary memories until they became extraordinary history. And somewhere on a shelf inside the observatory, a new blank journal waited patiently for the next generation to write the opening sentence of another story. Spring returned to Ashwood with the quiet certainty of sunrise. Snow retreated from the hillsides, revealing wildflowers that had waited patiently beneath the frozen earth. The river ran faster than it had in months, carrying melted mountain water through the valley with a constant, familiar song. The observatory opened its doors every morning at 8. By 9, the reading room was filled with students. By noon, hikers stopped to study the old maps before setting out along the heritage trail. Life settled into a peaceful rhythm. One Tuesday afternoon, a young boy approached the reception desk carrying a small wooden box. "I found this." Claire looked up from a stack of donated photographs. "Where?" "Near the old oak tree on the Eastern Trail." The box was no larger than a paperback book. Its hinges had rusted with age, but the wood remained surprisingly solid. Inside lay only 3 items: a pressed maple leaf, a fountain pen with dried ink, a folded note. Claire unfolded it carefully. The handwriting was neat and steady. "If this box is found, place it in the observatory. Every generation deserves a place to leave something behind." There was no name, no date, only those words. Claire smiled. "I think we can do that." Within days, the observatory introduced a new tradition. Visitors were invited to place a small object inside the box. Never anything valuable, only something that represented a meaningful moment. A handwritten poem, a sketch of the valley, a photograph from a family picnic, a pressed flower collected during a spring walk. Over time, the box slowly filled. Not with treasures, with memories. Months later, a local teacher brought her students to visit. She asked each child a simple question. "What would you leave for someone you'll never meet?" The answers were wonderfully different. A drawing. My favorite recipe. A map. A letter. A story. Ethan Ward listened quietly from the back of the room. He realized that Ashwood's greatest tradition had never been about preserving buildings. It had always been about preserving kindness. Every journal, every restored trail, every carefully labeled photograph, every note left for a stranger in the future, they all shared the same purpose: to remind someone they had never met that they were part of a story much larger than themselves. That evening, as the sun disappeared behind the western ridge, the observatory's windows glowed warmly against the darkening sky. Families lingered outside, reluctant to leave. Children chased fireflies through the meadow. Older residents exchanged stories on the stone benches lining the entrance path. The valley was peaceful. The stars emerged one by one above the dome. Inside, the wooden memory box rested on a shelf beside the community journals. Its lid remained slightly open, ready for the next visitor, ready for the next story. And somewhere beyond the quiet hills, tomorrow was already making its way toward Ashwood, carrying memories that had not yet been written but would one day become part of the town's enduring history. Summer arrived with long evenings and skies that stayed bright until nearly 9. The observatory had become more than a landmark. It was where birthdays were celebrated, where students presented science projects, where artists painted sunsets from the stone terrace, and where visitors paused before beginning the heritage trail. One afternoon, a package arrived without a return address. Inside was a weathered leather notebook. No letter, no explanation, only a small tag tied to the cover. For the archive. Claire carefully opened the first page. The handwriting was elegant and deliberate. It belonged to a traveler who had visited Ashwood nearly 40 years earlier. Each entry described ordinary moments. A conversation with a baker before sunrise. The sound of rain against the observatory dome. Children racing across the town square after school. The smell of pine carried by the evening wind. There were no dramatic events, no astonishing discoveries, only quiet observations recorded with extraordinary care. Near the final page, one sentence stood alone. The places people remember most are rarely the loudest. They are the ones that made them feel welcome. Claire placed the notebook beside the growing archive. It belongs here. Ward nodded. It always did. As the years passed, the archive continued to grow. Shelves that had once stood nearly empty were now filled with journals, photographs, maps, paintings, recordings, and handwritten memories donated by generations of visitors. Volunteers carefully scanned every page into a digital collection so the stories could never be lost again. The observatory welcomed people from around the world, but its spirit never changed. Visitors arrived as strangers. They usually left feeling as though they had been part of Ashwood all along. One clear autumn evening, a group of children gathered outside with blankets spread across the grass. An elderly astronomer adjusted the restored telescope and invited each child to look through the eyepiece. Gasps of amazement followed one after another. The moon has mountains. I can see Jupiter. There are so many stars. The astronomer smiled. The sky has always been this beautiful. So, why didn't people notice before? He looked toward the observatory. Sometimes people are too busy looking down. After everyone had gone home, Ward climbed to the observation platform alone. The valley below glowed softly beneath scattered lights. The river reflected the moon like polished silver. He opened the newest community journal. Its pages were nearly full. On the final blank page, he wrote, "Every generation inherits two gifts, the world as it is, and the chance to leave it a little better. May Ashwood always choose the second." He closed the journal gently. A fresh blank volume waited beside it. Another beginning, another chapter, another invitation for someone, years from now, to add their own voice to the story. Outside, the observatory dome slowly turned toward the night sky. Above it, the stars continued their timeless journey, shining over Ashwood just as they always had, steady, quiet, and patient, watching another generation discover that the greatest stories are not always found in extraordinary places, but in ordinary communities that choose to remember, to share, and to welcome those who come after. The first autumn storm arrived without warning. By late afternoon, heavy clouds rolled over the western ridge, turning the bright valley into a landscape of shifting gray. The wind moved through the pines with a low, steady whisper, bending branches that had stood untouched throughout the summer. From the observatory, Ethan Ward watched the weather settle over Ashwood. Years earlier, a storm like this would have sent him searching for clues, wondering what forgotten story might be waiting beyond the next trail. Now, he simply reached for the weather journal. He wrote the date, the temperature, the direction of the wind. Rain began at exactly 4:17 p.m. Small observations. The kind that once seemed insignificant. The kind that eventually became history. By evening, families gathered inside the observatory to wait out the storm. Children sat on the polished wooden floor listening as volunteers read passages from journals written nearly a century apart. One described the harsh winter of 1936. Another celebrated the return of migrating cranes after a long drought. A third recorded the planting of the oak tree that now shaded the eastern entrance. Each entry lasted only a few minutes. Together, they stretched across generations. A little girl raised her hand. Did the people who wrote these know we'd read them? The room became quiet. Claire smiled before answering. I think they hoped someone would. The girl nodded thoughtfully. Then maybe I should write something too. Claire handed her a blank notebook. You can start tonight. Outside, rain washed across the stone paths. Water flowed gently through restored drainage channels first designed decades earlier by Jonathan Mercer. The old engineer's work continued doing exactly what it had always been intended to do: protect the town quietly, without recognition. Ward walked beneath the covered walkway connecting the observatory to the archive building. The sound of rain against the roof reminded him of the first weeks of the restoration. Broken walls, collapsed beams, rooms filled with dust. It was difficult to believe so much time had passed. The observatory no longer felt like an old building. It felt alive. Every week, someone donated another photograph, another letter, another memory. The archive never stopped growing because the town never stopped remembering. The following morning, sunlight returned. The storm had left the valley sparkling. Drops of water clung to every pine needle, reflecting the early light like thousands of tiny lanterns. Volunteers gathered to inspect the heritage trail. A fallen tree blocked one section near the river. Within an hour, neighbors arrived carrying saws, wheelbarrows, and work gloves. Nobody had asked them. Word simply spread through town. By lunchtime, the trail had reopened. A family passing through Ashwood stopped to thank the volunteers. An elderly carpenter shrugged. "We're only taking care of what someone else once built." The traveler looked around at the restored stone walls, the wooden bridges, and the carefully maintained paths. "It must take a lot of work." The carpenter smiled. "It takes a lot of people." That afternoon, the observatory welcomed its 10,000th visitor since reopening. There was no grand ceremony, only applause from the volunteers and a photograph taken beneath the entrance arch. The visitors were a young couple traveling across the country with their son. They spent hours exploring the exhibits. Before leaving, the boy quietly slipped a folded drawing into the community memory box. Claire waited until evening to look at it. The picture showed the observatory beneath a sky filled with enormous stars. At the bottom, written in uneven handwriting, was a single sentence: "I hope this place is still here when I'm old." Claire pinned the drawing to the staff bulletin board. Nobody suggested putting it in storage. It belonged where everyone could see it. As the seasons continued to turn, Ashwood changed almost too slowly to notice. New trees grew beside old ones. Stone paths became smoother beneath countless footsteps. The library shelves filled with books donated from homes across the valley. School children who had once attended astronomy nights returned years later as volunteers guiding younger visitors through the exhibits. The story continued without needing dramatic moments. Its strength came from repetition. Opening the observatory every morning, recording the weather every evening, repairing a loose board before it became a broken floor, saving a photograph before it faded, writing one more page before closing another journal. Ordinary acts repeated over years became traditions. Traditions repeated over generations became identity. One clear October night, the observatory hosted its annual Harvest Sky Festival. Hundreds of lanterns illuminated the hillside. Local musicians played beneath the old oak tree. Food stalls lined the path leading toward the dome. Children carried homemade star charts, while volunteers pointed laser lights toward familiar constellations. When darkness settled completely, every artificial light around the observatory was switched off. The crowd looked upward. A gasp spread across the hillside. The Milky Way stretched from one horizon to the other in breathtaking clarity. No one spoke. For nearly a minute, hundreds of people stood together in complete silence beneath the stars. Ward looked across the gathering. Grandparents stood beside grandchildren. Visitors stood beside lifelong residents. Teachers, mechanics, artists, nurses, students, all sharing the same sky. He remembered the words written in one of the oldest journals. "Knowledge belongs to every generation. Protect it well." Years ago, he had believed those words referred only to books and records. Now he understood. Knowledge was also kindness, stewardship, patience, the willingness to preserve something beautiful even when no reward was expected. The stars above Ashwood had never changed. The people beneath them had. And perhaps that was the greatest achievement of all, not solving every mystery, but building a community that understood the value of passing its stories, its care, and its hope from one generation to the next. The Harvest Sky Festival became more than an annual celebration. It became the unofficial beginning of every new season in Ashwood. When the lanterns came down and the last visitors returned home, the town quietly settled into another year of ordinary routines. Volunteers swept the observatory floors before sunrise. Teachers updated exhibit cards. Gardeners replaced fading flowers with winter shrubs. Someone always repaired a loose railing before anyone else noticed it had become loose. Nothing happened by accident. Everything happened because someone cared. On the first Monday after the festival, Ethan Ward unlocked the archive a little earlier than usual. Sunlight filtered through the tall eastern windows, casting long golden rectangles across rows of shelves. Thousands of pages rested there now. Weather journals, sketchbooks, old maps, letters, children's drawings, travel diaries, recipes contributed by families whose grandparents had settled in the valley generations earlier. The collection no longer belonged to historians alone. It belonged to everyone. Ward walked slowly between the shelves until he reached the newest section. A volunteer had finished cataloging donations from the past year. Each box carried only a number. No one judged an item by its age or value. A faded grocery receipt describing prices from 40 years ago sat beside a beautifully restored navigation instrument. Both told part of the same story. Life. He opened the first box. Inside was a small notebook covered with blue cloth. The owner had been a local bus driver. Every page described tiny observations made during his morning route. The first robin appeared near Miller's Bridge. Mrs. Carter always waved from the same porch at exactly 7:35. The maple trees near the school turned red almost a week earlier than those by the river. None of it seemed remarkable. Yet together they created an extraordinarily detailed portrait of everyday Ashwood. Ward smiled. The archive had become a museum of ordinary moments. That afternoon, the elementary school visited for its annual history workshop. Instead of giving a lecture, Claire divided the children into small groups. Each group received an object from the archive: an old lantern, a train ticket, a compass, a family photograph, a handwritten recipe. She asked only one question: what story might this object tell? The answers filled the observatory with laughter. The lantern belonged to an explorer. The recipe was made for a celebration. The compass helped someone find home. There were no wrong answers, only imagination. When the activity ended, Claire explained where each object had actually come from. The children listened even more carefully. Reality, they discovered, could be just as interesting as fiction. Before leaving, every student wrote one sentence in the community journal. Not about the past, about the future. I hope there are more trees. I hope people still watch the stars. I hope someone reads what I wrote. Ward lingered over that last sentence. Perhaps that simple hope connected every generation more than anything else. The desire to be heard by someone not yet born. Late in November, the first migrating cranes appeared over the valley. Their arrival had been recorded in Ashwood's journals for nearly 90 years. Every generation had noted the date. Sometimes they arrived early, sometimes weeks late, but they always came. Residents gathered near the river overlook to watch them circle overhead before disappearing beyond the southern hills. An elderly woman standing beside Ward smiled. My father brought me here every year. And now, she pointed toward two young grandchildren chasing one another through the grass. Now I bring them. Traditions, Ward realized, rarely announce themselves. They simply continued, quietly, patiently, until one day people could no longer remember when they had begun. Winter approached once more. Volunteers spent weekends checking roofs, stacking firewood beside the observatory, and wrapping delicate plants before the first frost. Inside the archive, climate control systems hummed softly. The journals rested safely in their protective cases. New digital copies ensured that every page would survive for future readers. Technology had changed. The purpose had not.
Preserve today.
Share tomorrow. One evening, after everyone else had gone home, Ward climbed the narrow staircase leading to the observatory platform. The sky was unusually clear. Thousands of stars stretched from horizon to horizon. He leaned against the old stone railing and listened. No traffic.
No crowds.
Only the distant river and the wind moving gently through the pines. He remembered his first visit to the abandoned ruins years earlier. Broken walls, collapsed roofs, forgotten paths. At the time, He believed the town's greatest treasures had been hidden underground. He had been wrong. The greatest treasure had always been above ground. People willing to repair instead of replace, to preserve instead of discard, to teach instead of simply remember. A place is never truly defined by its buildings, its roads, or even its history. It is defined by the people who quietly care for it every ordinary day. If someone reads these words decades from now, I hope they inherit not only these pages, but the same willingness to leave something better for whoever comes next. He placed the journal back onto the shelf. Outside, the observatory dome slowly rotated toward the eastern sky as the first constellation of winter rose above the mountains. Ashwood settled peacefully into another season. The lights in the town glowed warmly against the darkness. Smoke drifted from chimneys. Families gathered around dinner tables. Children finished homework before bedtime. Somewhere, another notebook was being opened. Another photograph was being tucked safely into a drawer. Another memory was quietly beginning. And without anyone noticing, the story of Ashwood continued to grow, one ordinary day at a time, written not by a single person, but by an entire community that understood the quiet power of remembering.